righteousness, those that are righteous, that are still following me and loving me, I don't want them to get drawn away into your crazy, wicked stuff, right? I don't want you to teach them that it's okay to both follow the God of war and follow the Lord that created the earth, right? I don't want you to say Zeus is good and the Lord is good, because that's not true. If you follow Zeus, you're doing something else. Okay, everybody, here we are. Welcome to Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and I'm reading through the Bible in 1 year using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan, which you will find online at oneyearbibleonline.com. They have a whole bunch of reading plans. You would download the free chronological Bible reading plan. Use your own Bible in order to read with me. Your goal is to read first and then listen second. If you are here and you have not read, I'm glad you're here. I want you to read, whether it's before or after. I want you to read. If you're a regular, you know I want you to read first. Okay, so today is day 215. It is August 2nd on your calendar, and our reading today is Habakkuk 1 through 3, and then Zephaniah 1 through 2:7. And I'm going to say I feel like today is also another relatively easy, not necessarily short, but definitely a relatively easy reading. So there's a point that's coming across. I think God is pretty clear with the point that he's making. And so let's find out what that point is. This is the time of when Assyria has taken over the nation of Israel. So Assyria was a very big kingdom in these ancient times, which this is about 600 to 700 BC. Really, it's 700 to 600 BC. So I think we call it BCE now. And so they were a huge nation, and they were taking over a lot of places, and Israel was one of the places that they took over. Judah has been left. Hezekiah was king, and then he died, and then his son Amnon took over, and then, his son Manasseh took over, then Amnon took over, and now we are in the kingdom of Josiah, which was probably in the neighborhood of like 60 years later. So now we are in sort of the low 600s. And so they have already been cried out to. So Jeremiah is crying out to them. 100 years earlier, Isaiah was crying out to them, right? So like Israel has been taken for a while. The top nation has been taken for a while. And so Judah has kind of been left, and they keep swinging back and forth. Like, this is just the nature of the beast at this point. We keep seeing them swing back and forth into a nation that is following the Lord, and then more often than not, they are a nation that is not following the Lord. And I kind of dove into that a little bit over the past few days of like, what is it that makes it so hard to follow the Lord? Like, why is following the Lord so difficult that instead we would choose to follow something else, right? And even in some ways we recognize that there is wrath to be had, but we still choose to turn away. And like, maybe we make excuses like, oh, it wasn't that bad, or I didn't really do that, or that's not really what you said, right? We sort of like cover over all of our tracks instead of just following that path that is the Lord. And so what is it, maybe in our nature, or maybe in our personalities, what is it that keeps us from honoring the Lord by following his statutes and decrees? What is it that kept Israel? God lived in the nation of Israel. He spoke directly to the Israelites. He let the Israelites know, I made this. Each time you have fallen, right? Like, they had the book of Judges. So it wasn't like they didn't have the book of Judges. They had all the books of the law, but they also had the book of the Judges. So they would recognize, like, disaster happened, and then they cried out to the Lord, and then the Lord rescued them. And so why is it that they continue to cry out to the Lord, right? They continue to ask for his help, but they don't want to do what he asks them. And I always say, like, this is a cautionary tale. This is something in which we want to use as people who, for whoever's listening, right? I don't know if you're followers of Jesus, or if you're just somebody that's interested, or if you're somebody that is a skeptic, or whatever it might be. So I'm not sure, what it is you're choosing to listen, but just kind of internalizing what would keep me from following the Lord. Am I following the Lord with my whole heart and soul and mind? And if I'm not, then why is that? And then how can I make those changes in my own heart and in my own life, right? And I want to say that's kind of the crux of why I'm bringing this scripture to light, right? I'm recording it every day is because I want to turn towards the Lord, right? And I want other people to do the same. So just something to be in prayer about, right? To really pray to yourself and to think, am I? And if I'm not, then why? And then how do I turn back? Okay, so we are in the prophecy of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is a prophet that lived probably around the 600s, and we can tell that by the time it's probably like around when Assyria is going to fall. So Assyria gets so big, and if you remember, we just read yesterday, we read the prophet Nahum, and Nahum was prophesying against Assyria, right? And they were like, destruction is coming against you guys. You guys thought you were so big and bad, and now destruction is coming against you guys. So now we're going into Habakkuk. There are people that are living there, and this might be where he's prophesying from, right? So bad things are happening, and he can see these bad things happening. So it says, this is the prophecy that he received. What I liked about this, which was, I think, uniquely different to some of the other things, is it looks like it's a conversation that's happening between Habakkuk and God, right? Habakkuk speaks, God answers. Habakkuk speaks, excuse me, God answers, right? So there is a dialogue between the two of them. And so Habakkuk is talking to God, and then he's waiting and he's listening to hear what God says to him, and God is responding to him. So God doesn't keep himself silent from those who follow and love him, right? So God will respond. So here we go. It says, this is a prophecy that Habakkuk received. He says to God, how long must I call for help? So I keep calling out to you. Things are looking bad. And I keep calling out to you. And I'm watching as all of this violence happens all around me. And it's so bad, right? Like what's happening is so bad, and maybe it's so bad and it's been happening for so long that the law is actually paralyzed here. So verse 4, it says, therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The destruction and the strife and the conflict, it's so much that even the law is paralyzed. Like the law is like, it's in some ways, right? Like I have no power here because you're so far gone. I can't even recognize. This is like, so I work in a school, which if you followed me, you know, I work in a school, and like you don't watch the argument happen, but you watch the fruit of what happens, right? Two kids are down and dirty. They're screaming at each other. They're cursing at each other. They're fighting, or whatever it's come down to. And the truth of the matter is it's a lot of he said, she said. So like, I don't even know how to bring justice because I don't know what's true and not true. And of their characters that I may know, right? Like I might know that there's dishonesty and strife and anger and hostility and lies and destruction in both of them. And so then how do I come and give justice when there's probably not justice to be had? Their hands are both so dirty that like there is no justice in this situation, right? And so I feel like for me, that's a visual of what it seems to look like. Like you want me to destroy that nation, but you're super unclean. And so you're not following me. They don't follow me, but you also aren't following me. And so therefore the law is paralyzed. It doesn't know what to do because none of you are honoring me in any way, shape, or form. So the law is paralyzed in this sense. Okay. And then the Lord replies. And so he's like, the wicked are everywhere. Like I'm watching, and you're just letting all this violence happen. And the Lord replies in verse 5. He says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, because I'm going to do something in your days, right? Like I'm going to do this. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm raising up the Babylonians. So this is certainly what we would consider a wicked people, they by the standards of Israel, right? Because they certainly don't follow the Lord. And so by Israel's standards, they would be considered a wicked people. They follow other gods. And they also are starting to build their kingdom and take over and destroy all these other nations. So the Lord says, I'm going to build these people up. So let's get a little taste of who they are in this next section. We'll get that. It says, they are ruthless and impetuous. They seize dwellings that are not their own. They are feared and dreaded. They are a law to themselves, so they have no law except their own. Their horses are swifter than leopards. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horses come from afar. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities because they're powerful, right? And they do whatever it is that they want. They sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. So what they worship is their strength and their power, right? So that's the kind of people that the Lord is bringing up against Judah. And then Habakkuk answers and he says, so first he praises the Lord. Lord, you're not from are you not from everlasting, right? And he says, my Lord, my Holy One, you will never die. So he's kind of just honoring him and letting him know. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. Your eyes, though, are too pure to look on evil. So, like, you're kind of too good to do this. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? So, like, I hear what you're saying. I hear you're saying that you're going to lift these awful people up, but I'm confused as to why you're doing this. Why are you silent? Why the wicked swallow up more righteous than themselves? So, like, innocent people who this Habakkuk believes, righteous, God-fearing, God-loving people are dying in all of this violence. How, God, why can you watch this? He says in verse 15, the wicked foe pulls all of them up with their hooks. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net. So here we go again, like they consider their strength and power their gods. That's who they are, these people who are overtaking. They are considering their gods all this strength and power, right? They worship kind of anything that isn't God. And then he starts in verse 2 and he's like, I'm going to stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I'm going to look to see what you're going to say. So like I've put this out there and now I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen. And then the Lord's like, okay, here's my response to you. Write this down because I don't want you to forget it, which I think is kind of funny. I actually just, as soon as I said it, I thought it was funny because it's like, again, being a parent, right? We say this kind of stuff to the kids. Like, don't forget. Okay, listen, write this down because I know what's going to happen is you're going to come back to me and you're going to ask me again because you're going to forget what it is that I said to you. So write this down so you don't forget. So that's what he says. He's write this down because it's, and the real reason why he's saying write it down is because it's not happening, right? It's not happening tomorrow, right? So write it down because I want anyone who reads this to understand that I have deemed that this is going to happen, right? That this is going to come to pass. He says, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person is going to live by his faithfulness. So there are going to still be some righteous people in there. Indeed, wine betrays him. He's arrogant, this guy, this enemy. He's arrogant and he's never at rest. Then he says, everyone's going to taunt. So like the Babylonians are going to come up, right? And then he's like, once they kind of come up and they destroy all of these things, the people that Babylon has destroyed, they're going to sort of rise up and then they're going to start shouting out to them. Because it says, woe, they're going to taunt him and ridicule and scorn him. And they're going to say, woe to him who piles up stolen goods. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed, right? So they are sort of rising. They're starting to recognize that like, this is a bad people that comes in and takes everything over. And then it says, God rules. So that's what I wrote for my notes. 13 and 14, it says, has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire? That the nations exhaust themselves for nothing, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. These people are honoring themselves. Other people are going to come and right, and they're destroying everything and taking over everything and honoring themselves. And then it looks like people start sort of shouting out to them that they are bad and they're doing the wrong thing. The Lord is going to make this right? Because the Lord rules over everything. And so he's going to make these things right. He says in verse 16, you will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it's your turn. So they're going to come in and take over, and then it's going to be their turn. And then everything they doled out to other people is going to come to them. It says in verse 17, the violence you've done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. Right? And then in verse 18, of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman? All your stuff is worthless. And then it says, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So it's sort of like, I decreed that this is going to happen. And then we go down into Habakkuk's prayer. So this is in verse 1. It says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. And then it says, every once in a while we have these words that are still in the original Hebrew because we don't really have a good word to, at least this is what I think is why we don't really have a good word to translate it into, right? So like this word has a meaning that doesn't necessarily perfectly translate to English, but we have semi sort of translation. So it looks like it's a shiganoth, right? So, and this is sort of a rambling poem and prayer. So Habakkuk is sort of like just talking in a way, right? Like he's just like rambling about God, right? So he's just sort of like talking. So he says, he's calling out about the deeds that God has done. Lord, I've heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. So don't forget us. Don't give up on us. Make sure that we are told these things so we remember, right? When we're in this time of grief, right? We remember to honor you, to lift you up, to remember all that you have done for us because you've done so many things for us. So here's some of the things that Habakkuk is recognizing of God, right? His splendor is like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hands. So this big, great, and powerful God. Verse 6, he stood and shook the earth. My mic died halfway through that last thing, so I have to re-record, but only starting from here. We are. We're starting in verse 6 of Habakkuk 3. So he's right in the smack of this middle of this prayer. So okay, so I finished off with he stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. So just by a look alone, he made the nations tremble and shake. And then this other thing he says, you split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. And so what I liked what Habakkuk sees when he pictures God, right, is that God is creating the earth, right? And the earth is recognizing his power and his strength, right? And they're reacting based on that. So he comes out and he does these things, and then the mountains kind of shiver and shake, right? That it says the mountains saw you and writhed. And so I think that this is noticing that when you look at a mountain, I mean, from far away, it's relatively perfect. But when you look at it, it's not really a perfect mountain, right? Like it's certainly not a triangle. It's got like shakes and stuff in it. It might go a little bit to this side, or right, like nothing's like a perfect peak. So they all have like a little bit of disshaping to it. And so I think that he's recognizing like the earth has reacted to who you are because they recognize you. The earth recognizes you, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, the right, everything recognizes who you are. It says in verse 11, sun and moon stood still in the heavens. And then in verse 12 it says, in wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. I wanted to note that one of the things that I notice, and like this is kind of like God's wrath. Like we're sort of seeing the angrier side of God in this. Like Habakkuk is recognizing God's power, but it's looking a little bit scary, right? Like we've been asked before, why should you fear the Lord? Shouldn't you love the Lord? Isn't God love? Isn't it all about love? And I'm going to say that yes, it is. And it's because we don't understand, and I've probably said this so many times, but we don't understand the multifaceted nature of who God is, right? And so if someone were to say, what's the difference between God destroying something and you destroying something, right? Like, so why is God good when he destroys, but you are not good when you destroy? Or God gives you the okay to destroy. I've had people come and comment like, how can you follow a God who creates mass genocide, or who destroys nations from the earth, or who would kill instantaneously when they catch the ark, right? Like, so there's all kinds of strange stories in scripture that we would say, if that were a human, we would probably say that they were a bad person. And so what I want to say is I want to say that it's all about where the stream comes from, right? And this is why the Lord constantly tells us and talks to us about our heart, because we can do one thing, right? And it could either be deemed wicked or good, depending on where it's coming from, right? And so if we are following the Lord, our deeds should be good because they're based on following the Lord, right? And not because they're based on following people. And this is why people change with the wind, right? What was good last week is not good next week. I was joking with my daughter about man spreading, which is a word that we use now where guys like sit with their legs wide apart and they take up a ton of space. My son does. My son takes up, you sit at the dinner table and there can only be one seat at the dinner table. And he's not that big. Like he's like 5'8", 140 pounds. So he's not that big. So, but he takes up so much space. And I joke with him that he's man spreading. Well, through joking with her about that, what she had mentioned, I thought manspreading was just like a dude that spreads out. And she says manspreading is when a guy in power takes up all the space of everybody else because he only cares about himself. And I'm just like, what? Like, even when a guy sits with his legs wide, is he purposely doing it to invade in other people's territories? But I'm going to say that because the truth is that could come from a bad place or it could come from a good place, right? Like if you're just sitting in comfort and it happens to be that you take up a lot of space, then that happens to be. If you're deliberately trying to walk into a room and suck up all the oxygen out of the room, then I guess that comes from a different place, right? Like even the other example that I was thinking of is, and because I'm looking right at it, is a plant. So I have this one plant that's sitting in front of me, and the blooms are starting to die because all of the heat. It's just been so hot and humid, and like water wise, we can't keep up. So like the high heat of the day, we should probably be taking it out of the sun, but the high heat of the day is just sucking all the life. And so one by one, some of the branches are starting to die. Now, if I love this plant and I want this plant to thrive. So actually what I need to do is I need to go in and I need to clip out all the dead stuff from the plant because it's killing the rest of the plant. Am I evil for cutting the plant, or am I good because I'm saving what is in the rest of that plant, right? Like, so we really need to understand where God is coming from. And in this, all that to say, in this, with this prophet at this time, he is angry with his people for turning away from what is good. They're turning away from what is good and they are turning toward what is wicked. And it's been generations, and he needs to show them that good is in this direction and wicked is in that direction. And I've told you, and I've told you, and I've told you, and I've told you, and you're not listening. So now I need to do something drastic so that those that are righteous, because there's something in here about righteousness, those that are righteous, that are still following me and loving me, I don't want them to get drawn away into your crazy, wicked stuff, right? I don't want you to teach them that it's okay to both follow the God of war and follow the Lord that created the earth, right? I don't want you to say Zeus is good and the Lord is good, because that's not true. If you follow Zeus, you're doing something else. If you follow the Lord, you're doing something else, right? Like, so we need to be able to follow the Lord, and we need to allow the Lord to do what he's going to do to prune the plant in order to make it healthy. And that's what a good God does. So in here, when we see his wrath, that's what he's doing. So verse 13 confirms this. He says, you came out to deliver your people. This is what Habakkuk says about God. You came out to deliver your people, right? You threshed the nations to save your anointed one. So why did he do that? He did it to save his anointed one. His anointed one has point and purpose. He's anointed for a job, for something specific, for the people that follow the Lord, right? So this is why God did it. So it says, Habakkuk, I'm going to wait patiently. I'm going to wait for that day of calamity to come on the nation invading us, right? While violence and all this horrible stuff is happening, I'm going to wait in the Lord because I know that you're going to fix what happened. I know you're going to draw us back, right? And he says, all of these bad things, fig tree doesn't bud, no grapes on the vine, olive crop is failing, fields have no food, right? Yet I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. Still going to rejoice in you, even though those things aren't going to happen, because I'm going to recognize your promise. That's how we end Habakkuk. Now we're going to do real quick Zephaniah. I say real quick, probably not. Zephaniah is the descendant of Hezekiah, right? And so he is now the cousin of Josiah, who is king of the nation of Israel. He is a prophet. God is speaking to him 2 times, verses 2, and it comes down in verse 19. He says, I'm going to destroy the entire world. So he says that twice. I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth. That's verse 2. And then in verse 18, he says, in the second half of verse 18, he says, in the fire of his jealousy, the whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. So we have those 2 little sections. And then the rest, it says, maybe not necessarily all. I'm sorry. Verse 3, it also says, when I destroy all mankind on the face of the earth, right? It says, I'm going to sweep away man and beast. I'm going to come in and I'm going to massively destroy everything. However, there's going to be a remnant. So I want to be careful of what all means in this context. Because he says he's going to punish. Does that mean all the wicked? Does that mean everybody in a particular area? How can we understand what he means by all? And I'm going to give a little bit, but I want to be careful about this because we're going to see this in multiple places, right? That he uses this sweeping terminology. We saw this in the time of Noah. In Noah, it says, I destroyed the whole world, right? So how do we take that when we see something like this, right? Contextually, what does that seem to look like, right? So we have to go and dig into what he's saying at the time. So he says, verse 8, on the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I'm going to punish the officials and the king's sons and all those clad in foreign clothes, right? I'm going to punish all who avoid stepping on the threshold. At that time, I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who are complacent, who are like wine left in its dregs, who think the Lord's not going to do anything, either good or bad. Their wealth is going to be plundered, their houses demolished, right? It says in verse 14, the great day of the Lord is near and coming quickly. So this is coming. That day, verse 15, will be a day of wrath. And it says in verse 17, I'm going to bring such distress on all people that they will grope about like those who are blind because they've sinned against the Lord. Now, one of the things that I'm curious, is this like Sodom and Gomorrah, where he says, I'm going to destroy everything. And then it's like, well, but if there are a couple, right, I won't destroy for that. So he seems like he wants to destroy all of the wicked. And there may be some other destruction in that process, right? And that's what I'm thinking about when he says all. I think all he's using big language to recognize it's all who are wicked, all who are turning away from me, or great areas of the nation, right? He's destroying all of this in big areas, right? Like things like that. So I think we need to keep our eyes on stuff like that. And then in chapter 2, he says, gather together, you shameful nation, which I think is Judah. And he says, before this takes effect. So here we go again. He looks like he's giving them some alternatives. Seek the Lord, seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be sheltered. So again, that kind of butts up against that all, right? Perhaps you're going to be sheltered. Moving down to 4, it says, Gaza is going to be abandoned and Ashkelon is going to be left in ruins. This is in like the northern end of Judah. So these areas are going to be left in ruins. And he says, woe to you. He says, I'm going to destroy you and none are going to be left. And then in verse 7, that land will belong to the remnant of the people of Judah. So again, are we talking about wicked? I think we're talking about wicked. I think we're talking about mass amounts of people. It says their Lord, their God will care for them. He's going to restore the fortunes of the remnant. That's how we're ending today. So that's it. That little bit of Zephaniah. We're going to keep going in Zephaniah tomorrow. We've got more to read from him. If this has been a blessing, guys, which I hope it has, I hope you stuck with me the whole time. I want you to like, share, subscribe to the channel. I want you to really share this with other people so you guys can read together. Obviously, read before you come next time, and I will see you tomorrow.